Morning, Journey. Morning. Good to see everybody. Happy Valentine's weekend, right? Wow, you're excited about that one, I can tell. It must have been a bummer of a day for you yesterday, huh? Kind of like the woman I heard about. She took a nap on Valentine's Day, and she woke up and she told her husband, she said, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed that you gave me the most expensive, beautiful diamond necklace. She said, what do you think that means? He said, well, you'll find out later tonight. So that evening he comes in, has a beautifully wrapped present, a little box. She excited about it. She opens it up, and it's a book entitled The Meaning of Your Dreams. So it sounds like some of you had that kind of Valentine's Day yesterday. I don't know. It's kind of how it went for you. Busy weekend here in Central Florida, particularly the Apopka area. The Old Florida Festival's going on. They've renamed it the Cold Florida Festival, by the way. That's taking place. And then tonight we have a full marriage event tonight that we're excited about. But we're really glad to have you a part of our worship gatherings this morning. A man named Parker Palmer relates a fascinating story about settlers in the Midwest from years ago. The frontier farmers on the plains would prepare for the blinding blizzards of winter by tying a rope from the back door of their house out to the barn as a guide to ensure they could return home safely. The blizzard blast could come on so quickly and so fiercely, and they were highly dangerous, as many of our friends and family up north are experiencing even this weekend. When their full gale force wind was blowing, a farmer couldn't see his or her hand. Many froze to death in those blizzards, disoriented by their inability to see, and they wandered in circles, lost sometimes in their own backyards. If they lost their grip on the rope, it became impossible for them to find their way home. Some even froze to death within feet of their own back door, never realizing how close they were to safety. Even today in parts of Canada, in the Great Plains states, meteorologists advise people that to avoid getting lost in a blinding snow when they venture outside, that they tie one end of a long rope to their house and grasp the other end firmly. Now, while most of us living in sunny Central Florida have a greater likelihood of being killed by a blizzard from Dairy Queen than by a snow blizzard, the truth is that many of us have lost our way in a blizzard of busyness and constant activity, and we have no rope to lead us back to safety. One writer says that we suffer from what he calls hurry sickness. Meyer Friedman defines hurry sickness as a continual struggle and unremitting attempt to accomplish or achieve more and more things, or participate in more and more events in less and less time, frequently in the face of opposition, real or imagined, from other persons. You see, one of the great illusions of our day is that hurrying through life will somehow buy us more time. So we feel compelled to read faster and talk faster, and when listening, to nod frequently, to encourage the speaker to talk faster. We find ourselves angry if we have to wait. So we've learned some techniques to manage our need for speed. For example, if we're approaching a stoplight and there are two lanes and each contains one car, we will find ourselves guessing, based on the year, make, model, and driver of each car, which one will pull away the fastest. I did this very thing at a McDonald's drive-thru just 2 nights ago, and I chose poorly. I violated one of the most basic drive-thru rules. Never get behind a minivan full of people. Because they got like 8 people in there all ordering something custom. I could pluck a chicken faster than they can order. Can you tell I have some issues here? At a grocery store, If we have a choice between two checkout lines, we find ourselves counting how many people are in each line, multiplying this number by the number of items per cart. Some of us who really have issues with this will keep track of the person who would have been us had we gotten in that line. If we get through and the other person who would have been me is still waiting, we are elated. We feel as though we've won something, although we're not exactly sure. If, however, the person who would have been me walks out while I'm still waiting in line, I'm dejected. I feel like a loser. Does anybody else struggle with this? You are in the right place today, my friends. True story. One time, Melinda and I were in a checkout line, separate lines in a Walmart. And we were trying to see who could check out and get back to the car first. And she checked out slightly ahead of me, but I outran her to the car. And when she got to the car, she looked at me and she said, "Where's the stuff you bought?" And so I turned around and ran back in. I won, but I lost. Most of us multitask so much that we are unaware that we're doing three things at once. We admire people who are able to accomplish so much in so little time. They become our role models. At the same time, many of us are overscheduled, tense, frantic, preoccupied, fatigued, and starved for time. A University of Michigan study did some time diaries on children the age of 12 and under. These were children from a wide variety of backgrounds. They compared their results to a study done 20 years ago on a similar group. And they discovered the following. Children's leisure time has been cut from 40% to 25% of the day. Children's involvement in structured sports has doubled. Family vacations have decreased 28%. Families with double incomes, meaning two parents working outside the home, are now at 70%. Families eating dinner together has been cut by 1/3. In fact, the problem of eating dinner together has become such a chronic problem that there is now an official National Eat Dinner Together week every year. There really is. It's the first full week of October. So in case you missed a meal together, you might want to put that on your calendar for the first week of October. Driven parents are producing children who are stressed out and anxious. Carrie Kent is a young mom and writer, and she tells the story of another mom who had a defining moment when her hurry sickness was bluntly diagnosed. Her son was quite young, and he started to stutter. And this became a concern to her and her husband. They couldn't quite figure out where it was coming from, and finally one day she decided to ask him. She said, "Honey, I notice you're stuttering a little bit. Have you noticed that? Why do you think that might be happening?" He said, "Mommy, you go so fast. You only give me a little time to answer, and I can't get the words out fast enough." We go through the motions of doing so many things as if there's no alternative to how we spend our days. It's like being addicted. Only we're not addicted to drugs or alcohol, but to task, to work, to doing. Any sense of rhythm in our daily, weekly, and yearly lives has been buried in a blizzard of busyness that has overtaken us. And you add to that the storm and trials of life that blow into our lives unexpectedly and catch us totally off guard. And we wonder why so many of us are disoriented and confused. Friends, hurry sickness is not just a sign of a disordered schedule. It is a sign of a disordered heart. We need a rope to lead us home. Jesus was aware of the problem of hurry sickness and the blizzard of busyness, even in his day. So he repeatedly withdrew from crowds and activities, and he taught his followers to do likewise. When the disciples returned on one occasion from a busy and exciting time of doing ministry with their adrenaline pumping, Jesus said to them in the Gospel of Mark, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." Mark explains the context of that statement by saying so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. That could be a motto for many people here today. Some of us even imagine this to be a good thing, a sign of productivity, a statement of great value, that perhaps God will reward you one day saying, what a busy life you had. You were even too busy to eat. Gosh, I'm proud of you. Well done, my good and busy servant. But Mark did not mean that as a statement of commendation. Jesus urged his disciples to take time out for themselves. You see, following Jesus simply cannot be done at a sprint pace. Here's a fundamental rule of following. If we want to follow someone, we can't go faster than the one who's leading, right? On the first trip Melinda and I took to the country of Israel, we were traveling with a small group of pastors sponsored by the Israeli tourism department. A familiarization tour, they called it, which means they try to cram 10 days worth of activities into 6. And our guide told us we're going to run where Jesus walked. And we did. And that's how many of us try to do discipleship. We're running while Jesus is walking. It doesn't work that way, my friends. You can't go faster than the one who's leading. Jesus often had much to do, but he did it in a way that never severed the life-giving, life-sustaining rope back home to his Father. He never did it in a way that interfered with his ability to give love and attention and time to those who needed him most. He observed a regular pattern of intense periods of work and then withdrawing from activity for the sake of solitude and prayer. Jesus was often busy, but never in a hurry. He lived with a divine sense of rhythm. Let me ask you a question. How many of you are familiar with the 10 Commandments? Raise your hand, familiar with that? Yeah, most of you probably can name 2 or 3 of them. You know what the 4th commandment is? 4th commandment says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. A couple of quick things to note about that commandment. First of all, more words are used in this commandment than any of the other 9. So 102 words are used in the New International Version translation that we just read. More layers, more illustrations, more verbiage than any of the other commandments, and it is about sure that we get adequate rest. The longest and most specific commandment of God's top 10 list is about getting rest. I find that more than interesting. I find that very revealing. A second thing, think of the days of creation that are described in the scripture and what happened on each day. Day 1, God said, let there be light, and there was light. Day 2, the heavens and the earth appeared. Day 3, sky, land, vegetation. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars come. Day 5, living creatures in the water and in the sky. Day 6, livestock, creatures on the land. And finally, human beings, the man and the woman. And then day 7, rest. I don't know if you thought about this before. Man is created on day 6, and what's the first thing that happens after man is made? Day of rest. Adam said a vacation day, and I just started. I'm going to like this place. Here's a principle. We work from our rest, not rest from our work. Now you need to let that sink in for just a moment. We work from our rest, not rest from our work. It was as if God was seeking to instill in Adam, as soon as he showed up, the most important thing you are going to do here is to enjoy, rest, and delight in me. I made you and I love you not because you are productive, not because you are useful to me. You have value and worth because you are a human being, not a human doing. I made you most of all to be with me. The first thing Adam was to do was to be with God and rest in His sufficiency and delight in His beauty. Then the next day, Adam went to work, tending and managing the affairs of the garden. He worked from his rest in the Lord. Before the Israelites entered the promised land, Moses reinforced the necessity and importance of keeping the Sabbath, ceasing from work and doing nothing but resting. You see, stopping all activity to worship and delight in God once every 7 days in the midst of the surrounding pagan nations was a powerful sign and testimony of their liberation by God. And we too have been delivered and called out of a world that is constantly trying to prove its worth and value by what it does and what it possesses. The Sabbath is a reminder that we are loved by God simply for who and whose we are, not for what we do. Observing the Sabbath, we affirm God is the strength, the source, and the supply of our lives. He is the beginning, the middle, and the end of our existence. He is the Alpha, the Omega. We trust God to provide and care for us. Sabbath, when lived out, is our means as a people of God to bear witness to the way that we understand life, its rhythms, its gifts, its meaning, and its ultimate purpose in God. See, one of the great dangers of trying to observe a Sabbath is legalism, always has been. What constitutes work? This goes back into Jewish history centuries ago. One little old lady wanted to know if she could wear false teeth on the Sabbath. She wondered if wearing them would constitute carrying a burden. The rabbis considered her case and concluded that wearing the false teeth on the Sabbath indeed constituted carrying a burden. And so they ruled, thou shalt not wear thy false teeth on the Sabbath, thou shalt gnash thy gums. It's a little legalistic, don't you think? And so we ask, well, what about pastors? And what about police officers? And what about medical personnel who have to work? Jesus observed Sabbath, but He also healed the sick and He preached sermons on that day. What might be work for you might be different for someone else. Some people will have to choose another day besides a weekend day. The key is to set a regular rhythm of keeping the Sabbath every 7 days. Traditional Jewish Sabbath began at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. However, the Apostle Paul later on said he tends to think one day as well as another would do. And I know our brothers and sisters in the Seventh-day Adventist Church take a different view on that, but we're not going to resolve that here today. That's a topic for another day. What is important is to select a time period and to protect it. In his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Peter Scazzero gives 4 distinguishing marks of a biblical Sabbath as opposed to just taking a day off. And he writes that a day off can produce positive benefits. It can replenish our energies and make us more effective the other 6 days of the week. But a day off is not the same as a Sabbath. What's the difference? What makes a Sabbath a Sabbath? I'm going to give you 4 words. The first word is the word stop. Everybody say that word with me right now. Stop. Sabbath is first and foremost a day when we stop. To stop or to cease is built into the meaning of the word Sabbath. Many of us have a hard time stopping something until we're finished with whatever it is we think we need to do. We need to complete our projects, our term papers, answer our emails, return our phone messages, pay our bills, or finish cleaning the house. There's always one more thing to be done, one more goal to be reached before we think we can stop. But stopping allows me to embrace my limits. Remember what the famous theologian Clint Eastwood once said? Man's got to know his limitations. You know, I practice that. I really... Do I have to clench my teeth a little bit? Man's got to know his limitations. Okay, never mind. On Sabbath, I willfully and joyfully embrace my limits. God is God and I am not. He is indispensable and I am not. He is the creator, I am his creature. The world will continue to work fine without me when I stop. This is very useful information and it's a very helpful thing to realize. When we stop on Sabbath, We are reminded that God is on the throne, assuring me that the world will not fall apart if I cease my activities. You see, life on this side of heaven is an unfinished work in progress. We accomplish one goal, and then immediately we're confronted with new opportunities and challenges. But I want to tell you something very, very important. Ultimately, we are all going to die, and we're going to leave countless unfinished projects and goals behind, and it will be okay. God is at work taking care of the universe. He managed quite well before we came along. He really did. So He commands us to regularly stop and enjoy the fact that we are not in charge of this world, that even when we die, the world will continue on nicely without us. As one man said, after your funeral, everybody's going to cry, some more than others, and then they're going to go back to the church building and eat cold cuts and potato salad. So you need to remember that. Every Sabbath is a reminder to be still and know that He is God, and to stop worrying about tomorrow. The core issue in stopping revolves around trust. Do we believe that God will take care of us and our concerns if we obey Him? The story is told of a wagon train of Christians in the 1800s who are traveling on their way from St. Louis to Oregon. They observed the habit of stopping for the Sabbath during the autumn, but as the winter approached, the group began to panic that they may not reach their destination before the heavy snows came. A number of members of their group proposed that they quit the practice of stopping for the Sabbath and travel 7 days a week. This caused a division in their community, a division that went so deep that they decided to break the wagon group into two groups. One group would continue to observe Sabbath as before. The other would be free to travel as many days in a row as they saw fit. Which group do you think reached Oregon first? The ones who kept the Sabbath. Both they and their horses were so rested by their Sabbath that they could travel much more efficiently the other 6 days of the week. Now, I know what you're saying. That old-fashioned stuff won't work in today's cutthroat struggle to survive, right? You know what the number one grossing fast food brand in any mall food court where they have one is? Chick-fil-A. In big red letters on their sign, it says, closed on Sundays. I was living in Canton, Ohio, when they opened a Chick-fil-A at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, which is the roller coaster capital of the world. Do not be fooled by cheap imitations. It is undoubtedly the roller coaster capital of the world. And they asked the Chick-fil-A operator, his name's Doug Pugh, wonderful guy, if he wanted to open one in Chick-fil-A or in Cedar Point Park. He said, I will, but we're going to close on Sunday. And for a couple of seasons, they said, no, you have to be open 7 days. Sunday's one of our biggest days. He said, well, we can't do it. Finally, they agreed. They let him open a Chick-fil-A in Cedar Point. That Chick-fil-A outsold every other vendor in Cedar Point Park on 6 days' work. Why is that? Well, part of the reason is they got a stinking awesome chicken sandwich. There is something secret, addictive substance in that stuff. I'm convinced of that. They also have some of the nicest people working for them, but their success goes beyond a product line and courteous personnel. Several years ago, S. Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, made a decision that everyone in the restaurant business said, we'll bury you. But here's what Mr. Cathy said. Our decision to close on Sunday was our way of honoring God and directing our attention to things more important than our business. I love this next line. If it took 7 days to make a living with the restaurant, then we needed to be in some other line of work. Through the years, I have never wavered from that position. How refreshing to hear a business executive say, I trust God enough to stop and recognize He provides for us, not our customers, not the economy, not our business plan, but God alone sustains us. So we stop. And by the way, after this message last night, 12 couples went to Chick-fil-A. I think I need a cut of that somehow, you know? Number 2, the second word after stop is rest. Say that word with me right now. Rest. Once we stop, the Sabbath calls us to rest. Ruth Haley Barton is a speaker and author who's kind of a specialist teacher in the area of spiritual formation, particularly on the topic of rest. And she writes, I've learned there's 2 kinds of tired in this world. One is what she calls good tired. And that is a kind of tiredness we experience after productive work and a job well done. It's a temporary condition. And when it comes, we can be pretty sure after an appropriate period of rest and recuperation, we'll be back in the swing of things. But there's another kind of tired, she writes, that is more ominous. And it's what she calls dangerous tired. This condition is deeper and more serious than the temporary exhaustion that follows times of periodic intensity in our schedules and workloads. Barton says the difference between good tired and dangerous tired is the difference in the atmospheric conditions that produce harmless spring rain clouds and those that result in the eerie colors of the sky that signal a possibility of a tornado. She says when the sky is dark and an angry shade of green, you're not quite sure what's going on, but something doesn't feel right, and you had better pay attention. One atmospheric condition is normal, predictable. The other is risky and volatile. Dangerous tired is an atmospheric condition of the soul that is volatile and signals the risk of great destruction. It is a chronic inner fatigue that accumulates over weeks and months and sometimes years that doesn't always manifest itself in physical exhaustion. In fact, it can appear to be quite the opposite because it can be masked by excessive activity and compulsive overworking. When we're dangerously tired, we feel out of control. We feel compelled to constant activity by inner impulses that we're not even aware of. For some reason we can't quite name, we're not able to linger and relax over a cup of coffee. We can't keep from checking our voicemail or email just one more time before we leave the office or before we go to bed at night. And rather than reading anything for sheer pleasure, our nightstand is piled with books and professional journals that cram our heads full of more information to keep us at the top of our game. The idea of taking a full day off once a week seems impossible, both in theory and in practice, and we rarely, if ever, take time for a real break or vacation, choosing instead to work through holidays and break times. Not surprisingly, we find that even when it is time for well-deserved rest or sleep, we're not able to relax. We're not able to sleep. When we do have discretionary time, we indulge in escapist behaviors such as compulsive eating and drinking and spending and television watching and internet surfing and Facebook trolling because we're too tired to choose activities that are truly life-giving. When we've drifted into the realm of being dangerously tired, we might also be numb to the full range of human emotions. Now, some of you would think it would be so good to not be hampered by the negative emotions that bog other people down. But when you're dangerously tired, positive emotions become elusive as well. We just don't feel much of anything, the good or the bad, the highs or the lows. We're just kind of flat. Barton tells a story about Charles, a gifted physician, that illustrates the point. He writes, I discovered in medical school that if I saw a patient when I was tired or overworked, I would order a lot of tests. I was exhausted and I couldn't tell what exactly was going on, so I got in the habit of ordering a battery of tests, hoping they would tell me what I was missing. But when I was rested, if I had the opportunity to get some sleep or go for a quiet walk, when I saw the next patient, I could rely on my intuition and experience to give me a pretty accurate reading of what was happening. He concludes, when I could take the time to listen and be present with them and their illness, I was almost always right. You see, when we're depleted, we become overly reliant on outside voices to tell us what's going on. We tend to react to symptoms rather than seeking to understand and respond to underlying causes. And we rely on other people's advice and opinions too much because we're too tired to listen. But when we're rested, we bring steady, alert attention to our responsibilities that's characterized by right discernment about what is truly needed in our situation and the energy and creativity to carry it out. So we stop, we rest. The third word is delight. Everybody say that with me right now. Delight. Now say it with a smile on your face. Delight. You can't say the word delight and frown. A third component to biblical Sabbath is delighting. At the end of God's work in creation, He proclaimed it was very good. God delighted over His creation. The Hebrew phrase communicates a sense of joy, of completion, of wonder, of awe. I have discovered that many of us have a delight deficit. Because of the way that our culture has distorted the concept of pleasure and delight, many of us struggle with being able to receive with joy the many gifts that God sends our way each and every day. When we begin to stop and rest, we're better able to engage the very practical spiritual habit of paying attention. How many of you have trouble paying attention? Some of you are freely admitting that. Thank you. How many of you just turned to the person next to you right now and said, "What did he just say?" That's revealing. When we live in a sacred rhythm, we slow down and we pay attention to our food, and we smell and taste its richness. We see the beauty of a tree, a leaf, a flower, the sky that has been created with great care by our great God. He's given us the ability to see, to taste, to hear, to touch, to smell, that we might feast our senses on this indescribable miracle that we call life. Psalm 111 verse 12 says, "Great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all who delight in them." I love that phrase. When's the last time you pondered about God's gifts to you? And you let that bring you delight. John Ortberg offers some suggestions on how we might practically begin this habit of noticing that can trigger delight. For example, here's 3 or 4 things he recommends. Over the next week, deliberately drive in the slow lane on the expressway. It may be that swerving from lane to lane will cause you to arrive 5 minutes later than you normally do, but you will find you don't get nearly so angry at other drivers. Instead of trying to pass them, say a little prayer for them as they hurry by. Ask God to bless them on their day. My dad, I've thought a lot about my dad this past week. He had an emergency gallbladder surgery. He'd been suffering, been very ill for a couple of weeks, and they said you got gallstones, and they were going to do surgery next week, but it became an emergency procedure, and they removed his gallbladder this week. And Dad's 87, so it's always risky and always a concern when something like that happens. So I thought a lot about my dad this past week, and I thought as I was going over that point, I thought of a story when my dad was driving and I was a young boy, and we were on a narrow, dangerous, curvy country road in Kentucky. And a carload of people passed us when they should not have passed us and almost ran us off the road. And my dad was not very happy with that. He fussed and fumed about that. It was not more than a mile up the road in a dangerous, sharp curve. That carload of people that passed us lost control and went into a ditch, and there they sat. My dad is not a vindictive man. He really is not. He is a gentle soul. But he had the broadest smile on his face. And he just turned and waved at them and said, "Hello, boys," and just kept on going. Now, there's no moral in that story. It just reminded me of, maybe we should have prayed for them as we went by. I don't know. Here's a second thing you might want to do. Declare a fast from honking. In other words, put your car's horn under a vow of silence. Just for a week. Try that. For one day, eat your food slowly. Here's a thought for some of you. Chew your food before you swallow it. That might be a good thought for you. Take a couple of chomps on it before you swallow it. For one trip to the grocery store, deliberately get in the longest checkout line. Yeah, that's a real cross to bear right there, huh? Suffering for Jesus at Walmart right there. Or if that's too much to ask, let one person go ahead of you. They may pass out from shock, but risk it. Take some baby steps toward delight and paying attention and noticing this week. Finally, to observe Sabbath, stop, rest, delight, and reflect. Everybody say that word with me right now. Reflect. The final quality of a biblical Sabbath is reflection or contemplation. The Sabbath is above all things holy to the Lord. Throughout Jewish and Christian history, Sabbath has included worship with God's people, as we're doing here today, where we feast on His presence and we do it together. Every Sabbath serves as a taste of the glorious eternal party of music, food, and beauty that awaits us in heaven when we see God face to face. On every Sabbath, we are to experience a sampling of something greater that is yet to come. Our short earthly lives are put in perspective as we look forward to the day when God's kingdom will come in all its fullness and we will enter an eternal Sabbath feast in God's perfect presence. We will taste His splendor, greatness, beauty, excellence, and glory far beyond anything we have ever experienced or dreamed of. In short, we will finally be home. But in the meantime, don't let go of the rope. Sabbath keeping is the discipline that helps us to live humbly within our limits of our humanity and to honor God in our use of time. When we order our lives around a pattern of working 6 days and resting on a seventh, we are declaring with sacred rhythms of work and rest that will keep us well for the long haul and give us regular time for worship and delighting in God and in His good gifts. Dallas Willard said these words: "The main thing God gets out of your life is not the achievements you accomplish, it's the person you become." It's not the achievements you accomplish, it's the person you are becoming. So I have one more assignment for you before we go this week. Sit down with your calendar. Maybe you use one on your electronic device. Maybe you have the old pages of a calendar. But sit down with your calendar and look at what's on your calendar in coming days and weeks and ask yourself this question: is what's on here reflecting who I want to become? Don't ask yourself a doing question. Am I going to be able to do everything I need to do? But is what's on my calendar reflecting the person that I want to become? Because what God gets out of your life is not a long list of your achievements, but it's who you are becoming in Him. Would you stand with me right now? Lord, I would say, on behalf of everyone standing here and those listening through the internet, help me to grab hold of you as my rope in a blizzard of busyness that I will face this week, because I need you. The idea of stopping, resting, delighting, and reflecting in you sounds so good, but we confess to you right now, we don't really know how to do that very well. Show us the way, oh God. Teach us to be attentive to you, to notice your presence. The idea of observing a true Sabbath may require some changes. Lord, would you help us take the next step, whatever it may be, and may we trust you with all that will remain unfinished. Help me to acknowledge my limits and your greatness. Set us free to begin reorienting our lives around you and you alone, because you are all we need. In Jesus' name we pray. We all agreed and said, amen.